fascinated by guitar design. I'm not a good guitar player, which has its pluses and its minuses. On the one hand, I'm not prejudiced about things that guitar players are prejudiced about, but sometimes I also feel like the GM executive that has to be chauffeured to work because I don't drive my own car. Yes, I find guitar design fascinating. In our case, we have to be very cautious about how we change because part of our success, a great deal of our success, is based on our great tradition. And people don't want us to mess with that tradition. So sometimes it's just a question of scarcity of resources and we need to find alternatives or subtle, improvements, modifications. There are structural issues that we've lived with for years that we need to deal with. Being in business as long as we have and offering a lifetime guarantee to the original owner means you're going to see problems. And when you see them routinely, shame on you if you don't say, we've got to try and fix this problem without affecting the tone. Because that's really what we sell. Mike Longworth, who used to be the company historian, he said, we make a sound and we wrap it in wood. And the guitars, what we do with the guitars, we want it to last forever. And I think this museum is testament to the fact that if a guitar is well cared for, it can last forever. They need to be played. That's what brings out that sound that just improves over time. But we also build them so that they are basically on the verge of self-destruction, because that's where the best sound is. The fortunes of the company have ebbed and flowed, and I happened to join the business. My father joined the business during the folk boom, which was a great time. Kingston Trio, the Limelighters, the Four Freshmen, played Martin guitars, influenced a lot of what those of us in the industry call the wannabes. I want to be Bob Shane. Okay, well, I better get a Martin guitar because Bob has a Martin guitar, and then when I play Tom Dooley, I'll sound just like him. And then my father, managed to watch that folk boom transition into the folk rock boom of the 60s. Now, I was talking about this earlier. There's a photograph of my father. My father looked like a beatnik and grew up in the 50s, and his thing and the thing that he and his peers did was get together and listen to the Kingston Trio wearing their white tennis sweaters and their shorts and knee socks and penny loafers, and they drank beer and smoked cigarettes and listened to folk music. Well, now he's selling to a generation of hippies. And I remember, I didn't grow up here, but I remember coming to visit, and I could just tell my father and his fellow executives weren't quite sure what to make of this hippie movement, but it was okay because they were playing Martin guitars. When I took over, the business had slowed down. In the late 70s and early 80s, as music does, things changed. People's desire to listen to whatever changed. Disco was very popular. The digital sampling keyboard was very popular. And so I found the business struggling when I joined it. And I also found that there was because my father had made some acquisitions that didn't work out that well, there was a distraction from a management standpoint. And one of the things I said to my colleagues is, look, if we're not going to make many guitars, let's make sure we still make great guitars. And I think people needed to be reminded of that. When I took over, I was getting a lot of pressure to have a more formal relationship with famous artists. And my feeling was that we have always had a great relationship with famous guitar players because they went into a music store and bought our product. I mean, what better endorsement than to hear that someone like Paul McCartney actually went to a music store to buy his Martin guitar, as opposed to getting it given to him for free because he signed an endorsement deal. And I also thought to myself, I said, being a small company, I don't know if we have the kind of money that would get someone rich and famous excited. I always wanted to see the original D45 that Gene Autry owned. And it turns out it's in his museum in Los Angeles, in Griffith Park. So one day I went with a friend of mine, and there it was, Gene's Martin guitar. And on the way out, I went in the gift shop, and they were selling all this Gene Autry reproduction memorabilia, lunch boxes and penknives. And I thought, boy, I'd like to make a reproduction of that guitar. So I came home, and I contacted the woman running the museum at that time, Joanne Hale, introduced myself over the phone, and she said, oh, my husband Monty has a Martin guitar. Well, Monty Hale was one of the singing cowboys. And I said, I'd like to make a reproduction, give you one of the reproductions, and I'd like to sell some of the reproductions. And what I'd like to do is take some of the proceeds from the reproductions that we sell and make a donation to Gene's museum. She said, I think that's a neat idea. Let me call Gene. I'll get back to you. She called me back. She said, yeah, I talked to Gene and his wife. Mrs. Autry wants to talk to you. Okay. So I call, oh, Mrs. Daughtry, yes. Chris Martin, oh, hello, Gene and I talked. Gene is so thrilled that you want to make a reproduction of his original D45 that he has in the museum, but he thinks you need to give a little more money to the museum. So we did a little horse trading. And what came out of that wasn't only that we made a successful limited edition, but it gave us the template that we use even to this day, and this was 20-some years ago, when we talk to someone famous and say, would you like to partner with us and make an artist model, and we will give part of the proceeds to a charity of your choice. Every one of them has said, what a great idea. Some of them have private foundations. They all have charities that they're very intimate with and very concerned about. And it's just been a great way to formalize the artist endorsement relationship without it all just being about money. It's a combination of things. We have a good design. And I have to thank my ancestors for most of those designs. The double O goes way back in our history. The triple O goes way back. The Dreadnought came into being in the 1920s. Here's a product that's still considered an icon. That's what, 80-some years old now. It doesn't need to be redesigned. We do use the best materials available on Earth. They have to be properly treated. They have to be cured correctly. You can't just buy wood and make a guitar. You have to cure the wood correctly. And then it's the meticulous hand craftsmanship that assures us that they're not all going to sound the same, but they're all going to sound good to somebody. And the Martin guitars have enough of a personality that sometimes people will say, well, I don't know if I like the sound of that one, but this one's a killer. And then sometime later in the day, someone will pick up the guitar that you didn't like and go, man, what a great guitar. It's a very personal thing. I have a young daughter, very young, 2.5. I'm 51. So I do the math in my head and I say, 51, 61, 71, 75, before Claire gets out of college. I want to retire. I want to enjoy that part of my life. So I am beginning now to work with my colleagues on succession planning so that they understand that I have a goal to retire in the active day-to-day management of the company. I plan to be the chairman of the board forever. And that who knows if Claire will want to join the business or not, but it's going to be 20-some years before she even has to think about whether that's a decision she wants to make. I bring her into work now. She loves it. She loves going out in the plant. We're watching a guitar being built. She's fascinated by it. When I bring her in, she'll point to the door and go, factory, factory. She's also very therapeutic. People have moods. And as good as we all are and as hard as we work, once in a while, you're not always in a good mood. When I bring Claire in, everybody's in a good mood. Well, there's, the theory of business management has evolved. When I went to college, they were just beginning to teach participative management. It is relatively new. Years ago, it was called Theory X. Theory X management basically was the boss will tell the worker what to do, and the worker better do it. And that worked for a while, but as the world became more competitive, people that study businesses and how they perform and what creates success began to realize that you need absolutely to engage the people who do the work. Because at a high level, I can think I have a good idea, but I don't know if it's really going to be implementable or not. But at the level of where the work is done, first of all, they're doing it all the time, so they're probably thinking about better ways to do it. You've got to bring it out of people. You've got to make them feel comfortable to suggest ways to improve. And more often than not, they're going to have a much better idea of how to improve something than I am. But an individual isn't necessarily going to be able to implement that improvement without the help of others. And we do spend a lot of time trying to create an environment where, what I say to people is, we have competition. It's out there. It's not in here. We should not be competing with ourselves because that's what our competitors hope, that we become dysfunctional. Now, when I took over, one of the things that scared me was that I didn't have what I thought was a natural inclination to be a leader. Looking back on my career as a student, I was not inclined to be the president of the senior class. Now, all of a sudden, I'm running this operation. They didn't teach me in college. There were two classes I wish they had taught me. One was, so you're going to join your family business. And the other was, so you're going to be the boss. So those were two classes I didn't take. So now I join my family business and I become the boss. And I remember being fascinated by Outward Bound. We used to watch the National Geographic specials of Outward Bound and realized through some research that they offer professional development. So I went on a week-long Outward Bound professional development course in Colorado, and it turned me around, gave me the confidence to come back here and say, I believe I can accomplish something significant if I can get everybody else to join me in this vision that I have to continue to carry on what my ancestors created. And I have, since that time, gone on Outward Bound with about 250 of the people who work here. We go out for a week and we practice teamwork. And we've gotten so good at it that when we sign up, when we call Outward Bound and we say we want to schedule our week in June with Chris, the instructors clamor to join our group because they know we're into it. Because a lot of times when people go on these experiential learning things, particularly at an executive level, they are drugged kicking and screaming into it and they don't want to be there. And in our case, people volunteer to go. So the instructors are like, hey, we don't have to convince them they want to be here. We just have to have fun for a week. And it's really worked out well. And the employees get to know me. And I get to know them beyond just looking at their badge and saying, oh, you're so-and-so. It's like, hey, no, we spent a week in the woods together, remember? I have some concerns about the materials. You know, we've done a great job of convincing people that rosewood, mahogany, ebony, and spruce make great acoustic guitars. Those materials are getting scarcer. So now we have, one of the jobs we have to do is convince people that some other materials will also make great guitars. And then we run a little bit into our tradition. People say, well, yeah, that's nice. You have a guitar made out of cherry, but I want the rosewood one. So that's going to be a challenge, is this kind of re-education about what makes a great guitar. We still have the great design, we still have the meticulous craftsmanship. It just may be that the materials we make the guitar out of are going to be different. I think there are enough people that are committed to this thing that it will carry on, and it will always be something that people want to know is still here. You know, wouldn't it be a shame if everything on earth becomes kind of genericized? And there's no, you can't say, well, one is better than the other. I think inexpensive guitars are a wonderful thing. We do not make inexpensive guitars, but that's what people start with. So I want them to get a good inexpensive guitar. I want them to go to a music store. I want them to go to Guitar Center. I want them to go to Musician's Friend. I don't want them to buy it at a flea market. I don't want them to buy it at a store that doesn't know what a musical instrument is, because I don't want them to get turned off. I want them to get turned on.